Hello and welcome to the Book Club Review. I'm Kate and this is the podcast about book clubs and the books that get people talking. New Year, a time of replenishment and renewal, a time for seizing the day and planning intentions for the months ahead. It also happens, if you live in the Northern Hemisphere, to be the darkest, bleakest point in what can sometimes seem like endless winter, and it can be hard to marry up the best of intentions with real life. Perhaps some therapy might be in order, but as this is the Book Club Review, I'm thinking bibliotherapy is the way to go. Ella Berthoud is the OG as far as bibliotherapy goes, and has been practicing the art of prescribing fiction for life's ailments for nearly 20 years. She and her fellow bibliotherapist, Susan Elderkin, wrote one of my favourite books of all time, The Novel Cure, which is a brilliant go-to reference for books that administer to every psychological state. But not only that, a reliable source of absolutely brilliant recommendations. Who better then to help us with those questions that vex every reader? How can we find more time for reading? How can we avoid reading slumps? How can we read more deeply without it all starting to feel like homework? You're going to be joining me in Ella's art studio, where we sit surrounded by her beautiful paintings to consider these questions and, of course, to swap book recommendations. That's all coming up here on the Book Club Review. Hi, Ella.
Hi, Kate. So lovely to have you here in my studio.
Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
Christmas is over, normal life is starting up again, but it's still dark. Although actually it is no, it isn't sunny today. It is still dark. January can be quite a tough month. How do you cope with January?
Reading a lot is the only hope, I think. Ideally, cosy fires and curled up next to a fire with a good book is actually my idea of heaven. So I think if you can nestle into January and not feel like you've got to do anything too demanding, just read. It's the perfect opportunity.
And you do these wonderful Instagram lives where you recommend books often on a theme, but in the background of your room, you can see this wonderful, almost like basket chair you have, which I always feel looks a bit like a cozy cocoon. Do you think that's a good accessory for readers to have?
Definitely. I think it's a really good idea to create your own reading nook in any form, whether it's just a particular cushion with a blanket or if it's one end of a sofa, which is where you always read. For me, it is that hanging chair, which is fantastic because it is a cocoon. As you say, it's like a kind of pod. I sometimes put a blanket round the whole thing as well. So I'm literally hiding in that pod. And there's something about being disconnected from the ground because you're hovering. So you really feel like you are floating when you're sitting in that chair. And that is my reading chair. So I know when I go in there that I'm just going to read, and that's all. It is particularly good for winter, but then I sometimes in the summer move it out to the garden, and then it becomes a lovely outdoor reading pod. But I think it's one of the things I really urge people to do is to have a space in your house just dedicated to reading, because then when you go there, you know you're going to read and you will be less distracted by the outside world. Turn your phone off as well and leave it behind.
And before we get into our recommendations, just to get a little bit more of a sense of your reading life, what books are you reading in your cocoon right now? What books have you got on the go?
I'm currently rereading Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which I have already read, but we're doing it for our book club. And I'm rereading that because I loved it the first time and it's an incredibly gratifying read.
This is the one, it's like set in a space program, is that right?
Yes.
Focusing on female astronaut.
Yes, I rather flippantly have described it as lesbians in space. And that is the story, because it's a love story about two women in the 1980s in NASA, when it would have been completely illegal to be gay. And it's a really beautifully told love story. It's also very dramatic because you have a lot of it taking place in space, and there's, of course, jeopardy extraordinaire. Everyone's on the verge of death throughout the book because it goes back and forth in time. It's very cleverly told and it's just a great story.
And are you quite good? Will you have just one book on the go, or will you have two or three on the go at once? Are you like a mono reader, or will you have lots of things on the go like I tend to?
I always have lots on the go. So I always have a big stack of books next to my bed, which are ones to be read or even ones that I've just read, like the equivalent of Atmosphere. So, for instance, Cursed Daughters by Oyinkan Braithwaite, which I have already read, but I love picking up and rereading. So I'm a big fan of picking up books to dip in and reread as well. And then I've got the Booker Prize shortlist, which I'm slowly going through. Haven't read all of them. I do love picking things up. And then I also have old classics that I love, which I've read a million times, like Jitterbug Perfume by Tom Robbins. That's always to hand as well. So when I am swinging around in my pod, I quite often pick up an old book that is treasured and from 30 years ago and just have a little bit of a read of that, like Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. That's another one. I'm a big believer in having a shelf of favourite books to hand. So maybe 10 books, which are the ones that you love most in your life and which define particular moments in your life, perhaps. So for me, it would be Rebecca as one of them from my teens, and then Jitterbug Perfume from my 20s, bit of Thomas Hardy, bit of Thomas Mann. I do have a favourites shelf, and those books occasionally change. They don't stay a static 10, but they're near my pod as well, so that I can just pick them up and have a little riffle through them. Italo Calvino, he's on the favourite shelf as well.
I love that idea. That's immediately sparking off a million thoughts in my head, because how would I choose? What would my 10 be? Great, definitely going to come back to that one.
Yeah, good.
Listeners, let me take a moment to tell you about our episode sponsors, Serious Readers. They make lamps that are precision reading tools designed to bring the full clear spectrum of natural daylight indoors. As regular listeners will know, I'm a huge fan of my Serious Readers lights. From the moment I started using them, I realised what a difference they made, and reading in the dark hours of winter has made me appreciate them all the more. The reason for this is that Serious Readers use their trademark daylight wavelength technology to replicate the full clear spectrum of daylight, which makes words on the page appear sharper and with better contrast, reducing that feeling of eye strain. And they're recommended by over 500 opticians for that reason. Precision reading lamps are an investment, it's true, but Book Club Review listeners can get the brilliant special offer of £150 off any HD Essential reading light, plus free UK delivery. Invest in something for yourself this year and head to seriousreaders.com/BCR and use the code BCR at checkout. That's Bravo Charlie Romeo. It's completely risk-free with a 30-day home trial. If you don't feel the difference, they'll collect it for free and fully refund you. I'm pretty confident you'll love your Serious Readers lamp as much as I do mine. So let's get to some of those recommendations. So it's January. Okay, a lot of our listeners, particularly the Southern Hemisphere, having a lovely time in the sunshine. But here in England, it can be pretty dark. It can be pretty bleak. What books can get us through these winter months? What can we read to help us through January?
There's a few old classics that I often go back to, and one is The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim. It's such a lovely, optimistic, positive read. Or it's not really optimistic, it's funny in a slightly caustic way, but the setting is what completely gets you through January, because it's set in an Italian castle in the spring, which is like heaven. And it's a perfect place for your mind to travel to. And you're in the company of some very clever women who are talking in quite catty ways to each other. And it is also a bit of a love story. And it's about people being a bit fed up with their lives and then discovering something new. It's just got everything that you need for January, I think. Other books that are great for January, Patrick Gale's Love Lane, which is his new book, which is the follow-up to A Place Called Winter. A Place Called Winter was an incredibly brilliant love story, gay love story, which I completely adored. And that came out about 4 years ago. And he's now written the sequel, which is another beautiful story, which I think is a really good one.
He's a new author to me, actually.
Oh, I'm a major fan. And actually, he's one of the first people I ever prescribed to people when I first started doing bibliotherapy. He's written 20 novels, And the one that I first prescribed of his is called Notes from an Exhibition. And that is an absolutely fantastic book about an artist. And that's probably why it resonated with me so much. But it's about her mental health issues and her relationship with her children. So that's what got me hooked on Patrick Gale. I've then read everything else he's ever written. But he's one of those authors that you completely fall in love with his characters. You feel like you know them, they're incredibly tangible and real, and they go through big, major life dramas, and you're just completely captivated by them. And he writes very beautifully. So he's one of my favourites that I recommend a lot.
That's just amazing. Like 20 books.
Yeah.
I've never read him. Never really come across him.
Yeah.
But like in that way that it's just always so astonishing to me. You think you know about books. You think you know about the reading world. You think you know everything that's out there. And then someone will come along and say, oh, have you read? You're like, what? No, I've never heard of this person. I will seek him out.
I've got one more recommendation for January for thinking bleak, grim, horrible weather, which we're generally having a lot of at the moment. I often in January find myself turning to Ovid and reading the Metamorphoses.
Do you?
Oddly enough, having had a little bit of a classical education, because they're stories that you can dip into. Each story is very short within this massive tome. I think people are sometimes put off because they know it's Latin and it's a big old book. It's obviously translated. I'm not reading it in the original, but you can dip into the stories. So there's stories like Eros and Psyche and the story of Narcissus and all these stories which are familiar to you if you've dabbled in mythology at all. But they're just very beautifully told. Ovid is a very funny writer. The reason I read them in January is because they're stories of renewal. So in many of the stories, people die and then are reborn as something else, or they don't actually die, they just metamorphise, such as Actaeon being metamorphosed into a deer, which is obviously not a particularly nice transformation for him, as he then gets hunted down by his own dogs. But many of the stories are actually stories of metamorphosing in a more positive way. And it just makes you feel like the bleakness will end and there will be new life.
That would push me out of my reading comfort zone, for sure.
Are you a big mythology fan?
Not really. But it's funny you say, actually, I read Sarah Bakewell's wonderful book on humanism last year, and she writes a lot about Ovid. Reading about him through her eyes, I did think, oh wow, this sounds very accessible. It sounds like something I would really enjoy, because he writes about love and sex, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And they're not difficult reads at all. And each little story is probably only 3 or 4 pages. You can literally pick it up and think, oh, tonight I'm going to read about Cupid and Eros or whatever. And that's just a lovely going to bed story.
And yet, at the same time, just stepping back in time, the centuries collapse, and you can read the words of this person who lived so long ago.
Yes.
And yet, these foundational stories, there's something about that, I think, when you do read things that go back to antiquity.
Yes,
there's something quite extraordinary about it.
Yeah, no, another big favourite you're making me want to reread is Apuleius's The Golden Ass. Have you heard of that?
No.
So that was...
I don't have classical education. Didn't do Latin. My daughter's doing Latin and ancient Greek.
Oh.
And actually, I really love hearing about it from her because I didn't have that experience.
Yes.
And I've got very interested. I've got this wonderful book that I found in the secondhand bookshop. It's called Nil Desperandum. It's a lexicon of Latin phrases and the translations.
Brilliant.
And I've been going through, I love dipping in. You're saying about just dipping in and out of things, but I love dipping in and like picking a phrase and just finding out what that means and then seeing if there's some way that I can drop it into, probably not a conversation, that would be ridiculous, but certainly if I'm writing, I think, oh, could I use this phrase? It's just fun.
Absolutely. That sounds good. I want to find that. But yes, The Golden Ass is about a man who transforms into an ass. He is a bit of an ass. He deserves it. He's a rat in love and he gets transformed, and then the whole novel, and it was one of the first ever novels written in Roman times, is about him learning to be a better person through being an ass. But he spends a year being an ass, and he can only be transformed back by learning some virtues, essentially. It's a very ribald tale. It's all quite filthy. He's a bit like a sort of Chaucer of Roman times, Apuleius.
Huh.
It's a fun read.
Good to know. So I feel like if we want to all start our 2026 on a very academically highbrow note, then we've got the recommendations for you. I think just before we move on, to throw in one that we've just been doing for the podcast book club, which is an old favourite of Laura's and mine, and that is A Woman in the Polar Night by Christiane Ritter. Have you come across this one?
No.
It is an absolute gem. It's a memoir. It was written in 1937, I think, or late 30s. And she went and spent a year with her fur trapper husband in the far north of Norway, the Arctic. And when she goes there to be with him, he's living in this tiny, remote cabin. It's a hut. And she travels out there on a ship, and then a boat takes her to the shore, and then she's left there on this sort of blasted bit of landscape. And when she gets there, it all seems incredibly bleak and dead to her. She thinks, my goodness, how am I going to live here for a year? How will I survive? And it is pretty basic, but she's a fairly extraordinary character. And she just rolls up her sleeves and gets on with it in a way that's incredibly admirable. But he then goes off on these fur hunting trips and leaves her. So she's actually alone in this very desolate place for long periods. And then, of course, the Arctic winter hits. And so it's just dark all the time. And she is documenting all this as a diary. It's a memoir. It's a day-by-day account of what happened. There is a twist to the tale, which I'm not telling you. It's quite a funny twist, and it's a great delight when you discover it in the book.
Is it a memoir?
Yeah, it is a memoir.
Great.
It's the only book she ever wrote. It's beautifully written, and she also was an artist, so you've got these lovely little illustrations that she did of things that she saw there. But the reason it's so good, apart from being a pleasure to read, is when she comes through the other side and the days finally start to get light again, and the sense of rebirth and renewal and the way that she sees the world differently because of this experience is the thing that the book gives you. It's extraordinary. It transfers itself to you as a reader, and you finish the book. And although you haven't had to suffer going through an Arctic winter in a tiny hut in the far north, you feel like you have. And something of what she gained from the experience passes on to you. And that's why I think it's such a brilliant one to read at this time of year. And it's just a delight as well. It's actually quite funny. That is my top recommendation. Laura and I came across it, and when we read it a few years ago now, we both absolutely loved it. And we were very happy to bring it back again for the book club.
It does make me think of another one which is a little bit similar in a way, which is another memoir by another Laura Galloway. It's called Dalby, and it's about how Laura Galloway went to live in very far north of Norway with a herd of reindeers, not literally, but with the Sami people. Uh-huh. She fell in love with a reindeer herder.
Did she?
So it's quite a similar story.
I would love this.
And it's so good. And it's about Laura beginning her life in New York. She was one of the people that set up TED Talks. So she was very high profile in the world of social media, etc., and PR. And then she fell in love with this reindeer herdsman, went to live in Norway for 7 years, and you read about what happened. Yeah.
I just want to stop the interview now so I can go and get it. Great. Okay. Loved the sound of that so much. Brilliant. Dalby is narrated by Laura Lefko and published by W.F. Howes. Here's a clip.
In my old life, tomorrow I would be heading to City Bakery for an iced coffee with crippling anxiety about the Monday to come and how I would hang on one more day in a life that was becoming unmanageable to an extent of which no one around me was really aware, unless you happened to be the lucky recipient of a spectacular late-night Laura Galloway Ambien and red wine phone call. I was breaking open and falling apart, and to reveal this weakness and vulnerability to anyone might have caused me to die of shame. But the universe seemed to have plans for me, ones that would take me outside of everything I knew and everything that I thought made me, to a place where I now think nothing of not showering for 3 days straight, and Saturday involves helping chop wood for a fence post, or cutting reeds to dry and braid into shoes for the brittle winter to come, or smoking reindeer meat in a tent called a lavu while drinking bitter black coffee, the smoke clinging to my hair and clothing and settling into my pores. This is a place where you have to be with yourself because there are no distractions, only work and nature and time.
So looking back, how was last year as a reading year for you? Do you have a standout favourite, something that you came across last year that you really loved?
Yeah, it's always difficult to choose one,
I know.
and there are a few that I will have to mention. But I think probably the one I remember the most is The Artist by Lucy Steeds. It's probably because it resonates with me as a fellow painter, but I love the way she writes. It's a debut novel, which I find amazing, and she totally captures an era and a place and a time. It's set in the time when Cézanne was alive, and he's referenced in the book quite a lot. It's about an old codger painter called Tata, who is a bit of an old git, but amazing painter. And it's also about his niece, who's his assistant. It could almost be a play because it's only really got 3 characters in it. And then there's lots of them going off to the market and choosing beautiful fruits and vegetables to paint. So it's very sensual. I just love the way she writes about colour and about the process of creating art. And it's got a really fantastic, unexpected turn in the book. And it's also this rather gorgeous love story. So all in all, it's one that I loved on many levels because it's completely transporting, beautifully written, and about art.
Yeah, that sounds great. It also sounds like quite a good winter read.
Yes, true. Yeah. So I think I'd really recommend that as a perfect January read.
A stranger comes to town. He walks along a dusty road, fields of lavender on one side, a placid green river on the other. The sun beats down on his bare head, and he carries only a battered knapsack over one shoulder. He is young, barely 20, and walks tall and straight like a ballet dancer, or a soldier who has never seen war. The town is a sleepy hamlet in the south of France. The stranger is Joseph Adelaide. He clutches a letter in his hand. He has read it over and over, but it contains only one word. Venez. Come. Beneath that is a signature. The letter is from somebody Joseph has never met, but he knows the signature intimately. It is a signature most often found in the corner of paintings. It is scrawled in the corner of Joseph's favourite painting in the National Gallery, Bathers at Arles. It appears on paintings in gilded frames at Sotheby's and the Knoedler, and it is at the bottom of a letter addressed to him.
Tanya Reynolds there, reading from The Artist, published by John Murray.
I must also just mention Rachel Joyce's book, The Homemade God, which is another book about an artist, and I love that too. That's much more of a wide book because it's about 4 siblings and their dad, who's another famous old artist, and he falls in love with a 22-year-old, so who's younger than any of his kids, marries her, and it's about the effects of that relationship. That's, again, got lots of quite surprising twists and turns, but it's a lovely, another Rachel Joyce. I've always loved her books. Then a couple of ones I just want to mention as well, thinking of standout reads. I did really love The Hounding by Zénobie Purvis, which came out in the summer, and it's about a heat wave. It's set in, I think it's 1701, and it's about some girls who are possibly transforming into dogs every night. And it's about them being perceived as witches and their village turning against them. It's just really beautifully written, another debut novel, and it's incredibly atmospheric. It is set in a heat wave, so potentially a great read for January as well to make you feel hot.
The Hounding is read by Olivia Vinal and published by Macmillan Audio. Here's a clip.
Once, after a few too many pints, he thought he saw, in the purple dusk, an angel waiting for him at the water's edge. The angel seemed to him to be made of soft light, like dancing flames. Awed, Pete ferried the angel across the dark water. But when they reached the far bank, he looked away for a moment and turned back to discover that his punt was empty. This didn't diminish the significance of the visitation for Pete. He believed he was, in some way, special, in some way chosen. He had borne an angel across the River Thames. Sacred feet, burning and bright, had touched the splintering wood of his old ferry. Nothing much surprised him as he surveyed the bank from his seat in the alehouse window. He had learned this unflusteredness from his father, a ferryman before him, who looked up one day to find a row of soldiers standing on the river's edge. Soldiers were no strange thing in the village then, it being the Civil War and the fight for England's king raging in fields all over Oxfordshire. But these ones seemed to Pete's father like something from a dream. Sprigs of willow were fixed to their caps and wound like crowns around their heads. Weeds grew from their cuffs and pockets, encircling their waists. Flowers sprang from their buttonholes. On the river, he had asked them why they were bedecked in leaves and trailing branches. To tell them apart from the other side, one soldier said, spitting, their coats were the same colour.
Call Me Ishmael by Xiaolu Guo is a really brilliant retelling of Moby Dick, in which Ishmael, who is the narrator of Moby Dick, is a woman. So in this version, it actually takes the same events of the Moby Dick story. So it is literally a retelling of that story. But Ishmael is a girl, and she starts off age 15, being in her rather tragic, grim village in Kent. And she runs away to sea and has to become a man in order to have any kind of life. So that's the basis of the story, that she dresses as a man, goes as a man, and gets on the boat that ends up chasing the great whale. So all the characters are subtly altered, and it's a really interesting new look at an old, brilliant story. But Xiaolu Guo turns it into a really fantastic feminist novel and takes lots of the tropes that are in Moby Dick and turns them on their head, but while remaining true to the story.
There were windmills all along the marshes, stretching as far as the port town of Lydd, where goods and horses were sold at market. Those windmills stood on mud and marshes amid samphire and pink thrift flowers, the only warm glow around our house. They looked ghostly, especially at night, but they were full of life forms. Sea thrift loved to grow around their base in the spring. Then there were the robins and field puffins. They too liked to nest about the windmills. When I was a young girl, I loved picking the white sea campions that grew on the coastal rocks. We called these flowers dead man's bells, though they had another grisly name, witches' thimbles. They grew on the edges of cliffs, and that was bad luck. Nothing should live on the edges of sea cliffs unless it is a sad barnacle or a fearful clam, my mother said. She told me that we should not pick white sea campions, otherwise some terrible disaster would befall us. But I did, in spring and summer. I picked them and made gallants and hung them around my neck. I hung them on our doorknobs, too. I loved those little white, creamy petals. Dead man's bells, I heard the children sing. Dead man's bells ring.
Call Me Ishmael, published by Simon & Schuster Audio and read by Isabel Adamako-Young. That sounds perfect. We're cooking up an episode, actually, where we're going to do books that reference, rewrite, respond to other books.
Great.
Because it seemed to us there were lots of books that were very interesting that fell into this category. Perfection by Vincenzo Elettronico has made many best of lists at the end of 25 and deservedly done well. But what's really interesting about that book, I think, is the relationship it has with Georges Perec's novel Things, the Story of the 60s, which responds to very closely. There's a very sort of intimate relationship between the two. And I found that fascinating, but I didn't really feel like it was actually talked about that much anyway. So then that sparked off a whole little thing about quite a rich seam of books that respond to other books. And then I just read a really interesting book called Sky Daddy by Kate Folk, which is a very fun premise, which is that the main character, this young woman, is in love with planes, has a physical response to aircraft and believes it's her destiny one day for this all to be consummated. Her fate is that she will die in a plane crash and that will be almost like the marriage. But genuinely, this is her inner agenda, is just this obsession with planes. And it's almost about that secret inner life and then the disconnect between that and the outward appearance that she's presenting to the world. So it's very interesting. Anyway, I really enjoyed it. When I finished it, I was reading the acknowledgements quite closely in that way that you do when you've really enjoyed something and you're kind of like, where did this come from? You're all interested. And it turned out that response was in no small part a response to Moby Dick. I was like, oh, I didn't see that.
Wow.
But then I haven't read Moby Dick, so of course all the nuances would be lost on me. Then afterwards I was like, wow, I wonder, like maybe this idea of this quest, she's constantly seeking this plane that is going to be the one. And also something about that inner obsession perhaps that other people can't really understand, but nonetheless drives this main character. Perhaps it's that. Anyway, just so interesting, I think, as a subject to think about. Want to get more from the Book Club Review? Join me over on Patreon, where for a small monthly fee, you'll get ad-free listening, extra episodes, and you'll also be part of the Book Club Review community, a fantastic group of readers and listeners keeping in touch with each other over our reading and sharing recommendations. It's where I get lots of my best tips for what to read next these days. We're currently doing a read-along of The Count of Monte Cristo, helpfully endorsed by Phil in our Books of the Year episode. So far, it's everything he promised it would be. Join in with that, or just come and swap book recommendations in the chat and get inspiration for your next read. And at the higher membership tier, you can come and talk books live with me in person every month in our book club. It takes place on the last Sunday at 9 p.m. UK time, with a catch-up recording posted for anyone who couldn't make the live session. We're kicking off 2026 at the cutting edge of literary fiction with Big Kiss Bye Bye by Claire Louise Bennett in January, followed by Australia's Stella Prize winner Theory and Practice by Michelle de Kretzer in February. I'm so looking forward to those discussions. Head to patreon.com/The Book Club Review for all the details and how to sign up. I hope to see you there. Now it's back to Ella. Can she help us combat the lure of digital devices stealing our precious reading time? Many people are, I think, suffering from feeling the pull of digital distractions and then the fact that when we succumb to this, it does impact our reading. Even though we're all still reading all the time, we're just reading online, we're reading differently. What's your advice for anyone struggling to switch their phone off and read more? Like, how do you combat this pull of the online world? Is it your cocoon?
Yes, I was going to say one of my immediate solutions is the idea of having a place just for reading. For me, that is the cocoon, and that's what I do in that pod and nothing else. So I know that when I'm there won't be any distractions. If you can create that luxury of a place within your home, I think it's really helpful for avoiding the distractions of the phone, because I get it too. I'm a bibliotherapist. I've always been a passionate reader, but I find myself scrolling on Instagram quite often at midnight rather than reading a book. So the other thing that I really recommend is setting a timer to read. So it might sound counterintuitive, because when you read, you want to dive into the book and feel like you're doing it for pure pleasure. But actually having a timer and saying to yourself, I'm going to read for 20 minutes is really helpful, because you might well find after 10 minutes you're thinking, oh, I must just check if so-and-so's texted me. But if you've set your timer for 20 minutes knowing that you mustn't look at your phone, then it really helps, because it's only 20 minutes. You can survive that long without seeing if your daughter's texted you or whatever. And you'll get to the end of 20 minutes and then you'll probably carry on reading. So I think the timer's a really good thing. Another good thing, which is really helpful, is reading with a friend, setting up a reading date. It could be someone in your family that you live with, or it could be someone who lives around the corner, just saying, let's read for half an hour together tonight. That's lovely because it's really good company. It's got to be someone you know quite well who you can be comfortable being silent with. But it's a really nice way of spending time together. And then at the end of it, you'll probably talk about what you've been reading. And that's a good way, again, of stopping yourself from the eternal distraction of digital life.
There's a series of books which, I don't know if I've talked to you about them, but certainly listeners to the pod will be like, oh my God, I can't believe she's talking about these books again. There's a series of books I love so much. They're called The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon. And one of the very lovely things in the main character Emma does is that occasionally she goes and has reading teas with various other characters in the book where they just sit and they read together. So and always it feels, oh wow, yeah, this would be lovely. I want to have reading teas with people.
Yeah, that's such a nice idea. I'd be well up for that. Or reading G&Ts.
Yeah. Do you ever find yourself in a reading slump? And if you do, what's your technique for getting out of it?
I find audiobooks are the answer to the reading slump.
Oh, interesting.
Sometimes when I am reading a book that I have to read and I'm finding it difficult, or I'm not getting hooked by it, then I will turn to the audiobook version of that book if it exists, which nowadays mostly they do. And I normally find that will hook me in, and then I'll get into the book, and then I'll be able to pick it up again and read it. Another method is turning to my favourites bookshelf. So if I'm reading something, finding it turgid, can't really be bothered with it and feeling, oh, I'd rather be scrolling on my phone, then I will pick up a favourite from my favourite shelf, like Jitterbug Perfume or Rebecca, and read a few pages of that. And I know I love that. That immediately takes me back into my reading comfort zone. And just that act of reading something that I love means that I can go back to the book I'm slightly struggling with and feel renewed, replenished, and ready for a new reading attack. Do you have any reading slump methods?
I think, yeah, I don't feel like, I didn't think about it, I don't really feel like I do go through slumps. What I do that I feel isn't great is, I suppose a slump for me is when I'm just dipping into lots of different things and I feel like I'm not really focusing on anything and I'm not really getting through anything because I'm reading so many different things at the same time. And I used to feel bad about this. Then I was thinking about it and realised I don't think actually it's such a bad state to be in. I think it's a moment of just discovery and exploration. And I don't want to commit, and I feel like that's bad that I'm not committing to any single book. But on the other hand, I'm so enjoying just experiencing all these little different voices and bits and pieces from different books. I don't know, I guess maybe, what am I doing? I'm like changing the frame. Instead of viewing a slump as a negative thing, I'm like, embrace the slump. The slump is great when you actually are free from feeling committed to any one particular book and allow yourself to explore, dip into things, go to a bookshop, go to a secondhand bookshop and just rummage around, see what you find, read a first chapter of a few things. Yeah, because sooner or later you do come across something that actually feels like you've struck gold, and that is the book that suddenly all you want to do is just read that book.
That's true. Yes.
So yeah, I suppose I've rethought them perhaps a bit more as a process of exploration.
Yeah. I suppose I was answering the question more thinking about the reading slump, referring to a particular book that you're struggling with reading.
Oh, the slump is in trying to like get through something, but you're really struggling with it. Oh, interesting. Yeah. So that's your solution for that? To switch to audio? And
also switch where you read. So quite often, if you are reading in your usual reading nook and you're finding you can't get into that book, then I'll go and try a different spot, literally in the house. And quite often it can be an enjoyably uncomfortable spot. So halfway up the stairs, sitting on a step, or on a bench in the garden on a cold day, then if I read for 10 minutes, I actually find you've slightly tricked your brain into seeing it as a new book because you're in a new place. So that kind of works for me as well. But I do agree with you thinking about the reading general slump, but when you just can't get into anything, that actually going to lots of bookshops and libraries and picking things up and waiting till you get hit by something that grabs you is a lovely way to get over it.
Now, sometimes there are books where you do have to dig a little bit deep to get through them. Maybe it's a slightly difficult text, or maybe it's just long. Maybe the story is a bit meandering. Maybe there's no great central character pulling you through it. Like, for all of these reasons, and yet it's something you maybe thought you want to read, or this is why I find book club so useful, actually, because it will get me to read things, because I do feel this little sense of obligation that I maybe would put down otherwise. And then almost always it's worth it. It's really rare to have that sense of having to dig deep to finish something where at the end of it you don't think, oh, I'm glad I did that. So I do think it's worth doing. But what are some techniques for helping people when it is something that we want to read more deeply, we want to read more challenging books, but at the same time we want reading to be fun, we want it to be pleasurable? How can we marry up those two things?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. For reading more deeply, it can be a really fun exercise to choose a page of a book that you're currently reading. If it's a book that's fairly literary and has a lot of imagery and nice vocab, it's actually a lovely thing to choose a page of it and then analyse it deeply. Start by reading it aloud, then look at it sentence by sentence and literally think about what every word means. And you can either do that on your own or with a friend that's willing to engage, because when you start discussing every metaphor, it's a bit like doing an exercise for A-level or GCSE and examining something in great depth. You just find such an amazing richness within the language that your brain gets completely sparked by all those different ideas and images. And I think it works brilliantly with authors of all eras. So I've done that kind of thing with Thomas Hardy, but then I've also done it with Sally Rooney or Jose Saramago or Italo Calvino, or even Xiaolu Guo with the Call Me Ishmael, who uses language really excitingly. So I think that's a really great exercise. It's almost like doing a prac crit of your current novel. That's a way of really getting into the excitingness of the prose and the deep reading. But then going back to your question of it also needs to be fun, I do think that is really fun. But maybe that's just me being nerdy. But I think also people have to be not snobs about literature and really enjoy light reads as well. Yes, it's great to read really literary novels that are very polished and beautifully created, but it's also great to read books that are a great story because they just transport you to new places. I actually recently reread Flatshare by Beth O'Leary.
That's a great book.
Which I loved, and it's an easy read. But I was just so happy reading that because it's just such a lovely, upbeat love story with quite a lot of drama that goes through it as well.
This is a romantic comedy, isn't it? And the clever premise is that they are, because of London rental prices being so completely impossible, they end up sharing this flat that has a single bedroom, and one of them has it during the day. And then that character works nights, doesn't he?
Yes.
That's how that works. He works in a hospital, that's right.
Yeah.
So he's working nights, she has the bedroom at night, and then she's going out to work at the day. And for most of it, they don't actually cross paths. They just leave little Post-it notes for each other on the fridge. And you get this beautiful relationship evolving basically through Post-it notes.
Yeah, it's so cute. I loved it.
That's a great read. Yeah, no, I know what you mean. It's very good. Essential, I think Laura and I would both completely agree, to have books like those in the mix. Yeah, interesting. I was thinking the trouble with that is that then you get a little bit, it's a seductive path because you can only read books like that.
That's true.
And then you get a little bit like when you have to read something a bit more challenging. Ugh.
Yes, I think it's good to try and intersperse the easy reads with the more challenging reads for sure. Another trick, I think, for if you are finding a book a bit difficult is to read it aloud with a friend. I'm a massive fan of reading aloud, and that works brilliantly for easy reads and for difficult reads, because if you're reading a book like Cursed Daughters, I always say cursed, but I think it's actually cursed. But I quite like the biblical sound of cursed.
Yeah.
That is a really good book to read aloud because there's loads going on in it. And once you start reading it aloud, you experience it in a completely different way, the way the language works and the way the dialogue works. So that would be another good trick that I'd recommend for if ever you're finding a book a little bit challenging. Find someone to read aloud with, and then it will break the spell. Hopefully you'll just read a chapter with a friend, and then either you want to carry on and have lots of fun reading aloud, or you'll get back into the story and want to read it to yourself.
And this makes me think of a book that I've been reading recently, which addresses all of this perfectly, which is a wonderful non-fiction book. It's called Look Closer by Robert Douglas Fairhurst, who is a Oxford professor.
Yes,
I
wanted to mention that. Fantastic. Yes.
So that is wonderful because he is taking you through techniques for reading more deeply, for analysing the text on a sentence level, on a word-by-word level even sometimes, which is not a way that I'm used to thinking about my reading. I've been enjoying it very much, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like a way I particularly want to read. But what I've really loved is almost like understanding that this layer is there, understanding this way of accessing text is there. And actually, as you say, it can feel really thrilling to unpick on a sentence level, on a word-by-word level, how the writer has actually put together this thing that you're finding really meaningful, or that you're experiencing as a story, as a narrative. And it's a wonderful read. It's very delightful. It really gives you a lot, the book. It's very enjoyable to read. He weaves in various stories about books that have been meaningful to him throughout his life as well, which is always, I do love that. I feel like it's almost become almost a slight cliche where any non-fiction now has to have a bit of the author's personal biography in there. But I don't mind, because I like that, actually. I always really enjoy it. I want to get to know the people that are writing these books. And I'm sorry, authors, if you feel like obliged to have to put all this personal stuff in, but it is really nice because it gives the reader a sense of why this stuff is meaningful to you. And that helps me then relate to it. So I do like it. Anyway, he does that as well. So that's been great.
I love that book. And I think you were asking a question of what book would I recommend about books.
Which brings us on to books about books. Favourite subject, yeah.
Yeah, and that would be my current favourite to recommend because it's such a lovely, interesting paean to reading. And it really brings forth that idea of deep reading and makes you appreciate books on a whole new level. And he's clearly a really lovely guy who is bringing lots of fantastic insights into classic books and making you want to read more deeply generally. So I think that's great.
And also, if you didn't have that educational background, if you didn't get to study English literature at Oxford, which, let's face it, most of us didn't. Are you Oxford or Cambridge?
Cambridge.
You were English at Cambridge. So you're in that like little small bracket anyway.
Yeah.
For a lot of us, maybe people who didn't even study humanities, it's giving you something of that experience in a way that is really enjoyable, and it's all right there. He's offering it all up to you. Anyone can read it, which is there's something really lovely about that.
Yeah, because he really shows you how to do it. It is a window into an academic world, but it doesn't feel academic.
Yeah.
And that's the really clever thing about how he wrote it.
Lucky the people who get to be taught by him.
Yeah.
I could, of course, sit here and swap recommendations and talk about reading techniques just endlessly with great joy. But I've got a question that's come in from my far-flung co-host, Laura Potter, who says she has been doing a round of work-related parties in Vancouver over the Christmas period.
Sounds fun.
3 she got to go to. See, I don't have an office, so I don't get to go to an office Christmas party. It's a source of great frustration to me. She said at all 3 of her parties, she was asked, what are you most excited about in 2026? She says, apparently this is a thing. A very Canadian question, she thinks, full of good cheer and optimism. She says, you can be sure no Brits are posing such questions to each other at London parties. Thus far, she says, I have responded with a blank stare and unusually found myself lost for words. Clearly, these people don't know that I'm a working mother with a husband who works evenings and I'm only just about surviving. Still, she says, clearly I need to be better prepared for the next time I'm asked. Can Ella help me find a book to fill me with inspiration and bonhomie for the year ahead? I feel otherwise I may turn into a social pariah.
Fantastic. My response to that, a book to fill you with inspiration and bonhomie, is The Dud Avocado by Elaine Dundee, which is a really great book, a classic in the States. I think it was written in the 1950s. And I'd never heard of it until I started doing bibliotherapy. And I met someone who said it was their favourite book. I then immediately read it and saw why. It's about a woman who goes to Paris. She's 22. And her uncle says to her, I'll fund you to be in Paris for the next couple of years. All you have to do is write to me and tell me your adventures. That's the premise of the book. It's not an epistolary novel. I was just thinking as I said that. It should be, but actually it's just a novel about what she does in Paris. And she goes to loads of parties, and she is a very effervescent person. She makes lots of mistakes. She has lots of disastrous love affairs. She ill-advisedly dyes her hair pink, and she's just a young woman in Paris making mistakes and having adventures. But there's something about the book that's incredibly joyous, and I think it's a perfect antidote to when you're feeling a bit excited about life, because it takes you back to being that age and finding everything exciting and having all these slightly random adventures and events which are beyond your control and surviving through them. So I think that would be my suggestion for Laura, to see her through.
That sounds great. I've never read that either. Perhaps Laura and I, we can read that one together, and then we'll do an episode on it.
Thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for all those wonderful recommendations, all those brilliant reading suggestions. I did follow your advice. I did set up a little reading nook in my bedroom.
Oh, great. What's it like?
Good. And it's interesting. You think it's not going to work, having a little space that's your designated reading space, but actually it really does. There's something about sitting in that chair, which is the place where you've said to yourself, this is my reading nook, that really does help switch off the rest of the world, like sort of domestic concerns or work or all those other things, because you're in your reading space. And
that's
weirdly,
brilliant.
Certainly for my brain, but I think for a lot of people, somehow that seems to help screen everything out in a way that I found really joyful. And even when I'm not in the nook, I spend a lot of time thinking about the nook. Like, when can I get to the nook?
Great. And also it signals to anyone else in your house that you are reading.
Yeah, you're in the nook.
Stay away. Yeah. I'm in the nook.
Just the nook as a concept. Just, yeah.
Yeah. If you can have curtains around it, even better.
A physical nook or a nook of the mind, I think a nook is an important thing.
I agree. Definitely. Yeah.
So yeah, an absolute joy as ever, and I will be eagerly awaiting whatever plans and projects are coming to the world from you, whether it's beautiful artworks or more books or podcasts. Looking forward to seeing what you do next.
Fantastic. Thank you. It's been so much fun.
That's nearly it for this episode. You'll find all the books listed in the show notes. Find out more about Ella and her books, or maybe even give yourself the huge treat of booking in for a bibliotherapy session with her at Ella Berthoud, that's BERTHOUD.com. And listen out for her new podcast with Writers Mosaic, part of the Royal Literary Fund, which is coming soon. Don't forget about that Serious Readers Lamps offer. Use the code BCR at checkout for £150 off any HD light. I'll put the link in the show notes. And consider coming and joining the pod community over on Patreon. I would love to have you there. And you'll be supporting me in making these shows, which means a lot. Find out more at patreon.com/The Book Club Review. All the details are in the show notes. Coming up, this highbrow literary fiction is all well and good, but what about when all you want is a thumping good bestseller? On our next episode, Laura and I are diving into the bestseller lists, both the New York Times in the US and the Sunday Times here in the UK. And we're joined by our most regular co-conspirator, Phil Chafee. We're tackling Frida McFadden's chart-busting thriller, The Housemaid, Kristen Hanna's sweeping story of love, loss and female friendship, The Women, and Andy Weir's sci-fi page-turner, Project Hail Mary. Are these books flying off the shelves for good reason, or is it all just hype? Listen in as we try to crack the bestseller code. But for now, thanks for listening. I'm wishing you a very happy 2026, and until next time, happy book clubbing.